at clearancejobs.com, streaming to so many different places. I just click check, all the places. So if you're watching us, congratulations, you have found Clearance Jobs Live. This is Lindy Kaiser with clearancejobs.com, joined by Katie Keller with clearancejobs.com. We are excited to be talking about 2022. What is the year? 2022. What is time? Top causes of security clearance denial and revocation. This is always one of the most popular articles we publish over at clearancejobs.com. Huge kudos over to Marco Hakama, who is the kind of editor, moderator of our Clearance Jobs blog. So if you have not ever visited clearancejobsblog.com, check it out. He does a recap, basically goes through all of, I know what year it is now, Sean, Karima. Everybody's correcting me on year. I refuse. We're talking about 2022 causes of clearance denial and revocation. So that's why I'm saying 2022. I know it's not 2022 anymore, and I'm glad. Good riddance, 2022. Goodbye. I'm ready for 2023. You got married in 2022, so it was a good year for you, Katie. It was
stressful. If you can imagine buying a house and planning a wedding in the same year with a 1-year-old. It's hilarious.
Baby, house, so many things happening over the past year. Anyway, we're talking about top cause of clearance denial and revocation. So in the link in the show notes in the description here, we have a link to that article. It's worth checking out. And there's definitely some trends worth noting in those causes of clearance denial and revocation. So Katie and I are joining you today to talk about that. I love all of you joining us in the chat. So hello, Michael, John, Sean, all of you. Thank you. If you have questions about the clearance process, drop them in. We'll consider this a little bit of an Ask Me Anything thread as well, because clearance denials and revocations hit so many different things. I know, and Dregan says, congratulations, Katie. Thank you.
Thanks, Dregan.
Appreciate that. So we're going to talk about top causes of clearance denial and revocation. Those are all based on the 13 adjudicative guidelines, which you can read more about. And again, read that article. So clearance denials and revocations are always tied to one of those adjudicative criteria. So there are no surprises or catch-22s. Can you stop babbling, please, Julia? I'll do my best. So these are all related. If you don't want to hear us babble, you can just read the article. I mean, please, you can go to the article. So top clauses of clearance denial and revocation are tied to one of those 13 adjudicative criteria. Those are things like alcohol consumption, foreign influence, foreign preference, allegiance to United States. Those are the same. And what we report on every year is how many of those are attached to each of those adjudicative guidelines. So financial issues are almost always, the top cause of clearance denial and revocation. And that did not change at all in 2022. We saw a huge uptick in financial issues being a top cause of clearance denial and revocation. So now you've written about financial issues over some of the threads and forum chat topics over at clearancejobsblog.com. Maybe what are some of the common threads, or maybe some of the unexpected threads you've seen and some of the questions that come up around financial issues, Katie?
Sure. I mean, the main thing that I'm surprised about is the cadence of how many financial questions we do get at clearancejobsblog.com. It really is trending more towards the drug sort of questions. How far back, if I did use drugs, do I have the ability to obtain a security clearance? We don't get a ton of questions surrounding financial considerations. I mean, we do get some. I won't say that we don't get any. A lot of them surround around questions of what, we've called previously good debt. So student debt. But really there, the main sort of guideline is you just need to make your payments on time and show a pattern that you are trying to overcome any debt that you have gained in the past. So that's one of the surprising things. Not a ton of questions surrounding finances. But I know that you've covered Doha doses.
Yes.
Some of those sizable,
Because people maybe are blindsided by financial issues. So I think it's worth knowing we have had a few questions come up. What kind of financial issues come up? What we always advise folks, if you are applying for a security clearance, or if you already have a clearance, know your credit score and be aware of what would come up in your credit report. They are not looking for bank statements. They are not going to be aware of the ebb and flow of how you're spending money. The government is not checking out how you're using your credit cards. This is all really specific to things that are going to be in your credit report. So it really comes down to delinquencies, bankruptcies, foreclosures, the cause and effect of debt. And now what I always say is any of those issues, a high debt volume, bankruptcy, none of those things are a surefire clearance, denial, or revocation. Those are just things that the government is going to be aware of. Again, could create a potential denial revocation situation where you would have to go in and respond to a statement of reason, say, hey, this is why I had all of this debt. Proactivity pays significantly. Again, somebody asked about little credit. They are not going to care if you have a low credit score just because you have not built up credit yet. That's not a factor. They're really looking at, do you have, again, financial burdens that could make you susceptible to blackmail or that indicate greater issues within reliability, trustworthiness. So we talk a lot about how the government wants you to pay Uncle Sam. So tax debt is a frequent one. I would say that's one of the more frequent ones I come up with, failure to pay taxes. Now, I have seen folks mitigate that because maybe they had a property settlement issue or they didn't file taxes because of an inheritance issue. So it's not to say if you failed to file taxes or had a tax issue that you're always going to lose your clearance, but a significant percentage of the financial issues I see are either A, failure to file taxes. I mean, the government wants its own. If you're not paying your taxes, they're kind of like, why exactly would you like to work in national security? And then the other side of it too is just not being proactive. So I've seen folks get a statement of reasons. If you take steps and then resolve or address your debt, then that definitely helps. Question about medical bills. They do consider the cause of debt. So if you have a significant amount of debt and it's related to medical bills, but they're also going to consider, like, do you have medical bills and you also have a high car loan? I mean, right. So things like that. Should you sell your car to pay off your medical bills and purchase a lower price? I mean, and again, there is a whole person concept here. So it's going to be very much based on your situation. Consulting a financial professional or advisor certainly helps. So looking into that, I mean, being proactive is probably the biggest step that you can take. Yes, they will look into the cause of your debt. And then steps to address it are going to be significant. Anything else you think we need to touch on finances before we?
No, you covered it, dear.
Move on to our next adjudicative guide. Oh, which one should we do? There's so many hot topic ones. I will say across the board, all adjudicative guidelines saw an uptick other than allegiance to the United States. So there's no red scare. Good job, America. We don't have allegiance to the United States issues. That stayed at 0 for 2022 and 2021. Everything else saw a huge uptick. So the numbers might be a little misleading. I think we had kind of a stall out year where we had fewer just adjudicated decisions made in 2021 due to COVID stuff. And then we saw a lot of cases that had been kind of stalled, pushed into 2022. So if you look at the numbers, everything goes up when you compare 21 and 2022. What I'm kind of paying attention to that's significant is percentages going up. So we saw kind of alcohol consumption go up as a percentage. Definitely saw sexual behavior go up as a percentage. That's always one I love to talk about, obviously. But people ask, like, hey, why does sexual behavior play a role? We've written a ton about Pornhub on clearance jobs and their legal issues. Sexual behavior just comes up because of illegal content, viewing illegal content. And even Marco wrote about that. The uptick in sexual behavior cases. He actually reads through all those cases. He said a lot of those were due to child pornography issues. So if you're viewing child pornography on the internet, you need to go to jail and you're not going to get a security clearance. And you get a lot of those. I've seen those questions over at the Clearance Jobs blog. So what are some of those kind of?
So I did pull a few interesting ones. One, this prior security clearance holder had done some compliance training on his personal device and accidentally uploaded a porn image instead of the certificate. So he was worried, or they were worried about applying, getting back into the security clearance world. That was an interesting one. Another is, like you said, Marco has written about accidentally viewing child pornography, which has been a huge issue. Another one, which was my favorite, Ask CJ, probably was happy massage that turned into a happy ending accidentally, or accidental prostitution. So those stories are really interesting because it's almost like not taking blame or just really not owning up to a situation or lying about it on the SF-86 and then it coming back to bite you a little bit later. So those are some of the interesting stories that I've written about on the Ask CJ column from our clearance jobs blog. So
yeah. Hey, you have questions about the clearance process. We have answers. So anytime you have questions, feel free to ask us. I mean, I think it's remember the SF-86 does not ask you any sexual questions. So you're not asked to provide any information, any sensitive information there. The PVQ, the personnel vetting questionnaire, which should be released in like 2024, 2025 timeframe. It goes even further in terms of, not asking questions that are not relevant to the process and narrowing the scope of questions that are more relevant to reliability and trustworthiness. But it's going to come up in a polygraph. And again, if it comes up in, certainly could come up around criminal behavior or conduct, we've seen that. So whether it's, we had an upskirting issue or something with someone has like had a problem doing upskirting videos. That was a denial and revocation. Obviously, criminal conduct connotations there, but also had sexual behavior connotations. Again, I said we'd ask questions that come in. So some people have seen several questions about expired, current, all of that clearance eligibility stuff. So if you do leave a cleared position, your clearance eligibility, you still retain access generally for 2 years. That's still the time frame that we see used. There's been some discussion about potentially changing that. Hey, what up, Robert? How are you? I like a personal shout out. Thank you. But your clearance will stay current for approximately 2 years. There's been some talk about changing that, but for now it's still 2 years. If you leave the military, you're separate from service. If you're within that 2 year window, you can jump back into a cleared position within 2 years. No issues. How long is the process taking now, Justice? Good question. We have that article posted, clearance jobs. I don't have the numbers memorized off the top of my head, but it's less than 100 days for a TS clearance. I think are hovering around 60 to 70 days for a secret clearance, I want to say. Those are averages. Those are the fastest 90% of applicants. So if you have, we're talking about the financial issues. We're talking about causes of clearance and denial here. If you have some issues in your background, that's going to stall your clearance. It's going to take a little slower. It's going to be a slower process than those fastest clearances. Can you get a clearance before getting a job or internship? No, unfortunately, that is the catch-22 part of it. The clearance comes with the position. So you can't get yourself cleared and then jump into a role. But there are a lot of companies willing to sponsor your security clearance. We had a conversation with GDIT recently. A lot of the employers that we've talked to, Katie, you probably talked to a lot of folks that are willing to sponsor security clearances, even on the podcast. Do you have any advice on that, on folks who are looking to get their clearance sponsored?
Sure. I mean, I think I keep on continuing to say as clearance processing times go down, now is the time, if you aren't cleared, to really advocate for yourself in getting a clearance. I recently talked with Kashan. He is a student that obtained a security clearance through an internship. And I think what I gathered from the conversation is really getting in good with an FSO or someone a part of the HR team and really talking about what you can bring to the table and why someone should invest in you long-term in obtaining that security clearance. The larger companies are going to be more inclined to do it. That when I was recruiting, that was certainly true. And I think it still is today, just in my conversations. So just putting yourself out there, talking about if you are eligible, bringing that to the table. If you've previously maintained a security clearance, talking about how you don't think something in your background would necessarily hinder you since you've maintained one fairly recently. So I know coming out of the military, a lot of folks want to sort of take a break, and naturally that makes sense. But thinking about those timelines and that 2 year timeline from when you last held a clearance, and then talking about what you bring to the table, I think are two good points.
Yeah, we've had a ton of different questions come in with the chat. I just saw Savannah ask the cost for obtaining a security clearance. Again, that ties into this too, because you cannot obtain a security clearance on your own. You don't actually pay for a security clearance on your own. And even when it comes to government contractors, they actually don't pay that. Now, the pushback is always there is a cost to maintain a personnel security program. So there are costs baked in, but those companies are not paying that. The government is paying that cost. So it is a government, incurred cost to actually conduct those security clearances. I think it's between $5,000 and $6,000 for a top secret clearance, much cheaper, around $500 for a secret clearance. And that's because a secret clearance is so automated. And that's another question that we just addressed over at Clearance Jobs. We have an article about it. Had questions come in about getting a clearance upgrade. Hey, I went for a TS clearance. I'm denied my top secret clearance. Do I lose my secret clearance eligibility? I know that's one that's been up on the blog too, Katie. The answer is yes. Now, it depends if you're going through different agencies. I've seen folks who have been within DOD and then get denied that clearance within the IC. And because the IC doesn't always, scattered castles, DIS, they don't always communicate. You might not have that information trickle into DIS, and that might not affect your DOD clearance eligibility straight out the gate, but you it certainly could. And what you would have to do is when you're submitting an updated SF-86, you'd have to indicate that you had previously been denied a clearance too. So definitely read the adjudicative guidelines. They are the same. And if you are applying for a security clearance and somehow something wasn't caught at the secret level, don't just assume it won't be caught, because the TS clearance investigation is so much more in depth than the secret clearance. And that's why you see more denials and revocations for the top secret clearance level, not because the standards are different, but because the investigation is just more thorough and more robust. So you skate through on the automated checks of the secret clearance, but you still have issues, especially issues that you didn't necessarily report. And that's worth noting too. Personal conduct is usually number 2 year after year on clearance denials and revocations. And that usually comes down to lying on the SF-86, almost always. So if there's anything that you didn't report on the SF-86 that you should have, they will get you on personal conduct. And that's definitely a top cause for clearance denial and revocation. Do you have any thoughts on that, Katie?
Well, I know a few folks have asked about marijuana and, potentially lying about things like that on the SF-86. If you do have a poly coming up, we would just, recommend being honest. That's the best thing that you can do. In terms of other personal conduct, I'm trying to think of some other stories on lying on the SF-86. One from the Clearance Jobs blog. I know that Marco has responded to this a ton. Sort of asking the question about how you answer the charges question. If you were, if you had to go to jail for something, or was it just a minor offense? Don't try to create this scenario, this delusional scenario in your head that if you were charged, if you received a citation and it asked that question on the SF-86, you just need to answer honestly. So that would be my recommendation there. I know that that's a question that we've gotten a ton on the blog.
Yeah. And Emil asked about reciprocity or clearance transfers. So this is something the PAC PMO has been releasing statistics on that and it's gotten way better. The reciprocity piece specific to DOD. So now they're reporting a 5-day average reciprocity time for a clearance to get transferred into DOD. Now, transferring a clearance to the IC is a totally another story, and they don't release their figures probably because they're so terrible. So reciprocity really depends on the agency. DHS used to have historically terrible figures too, and also does not release them. And that all comes down to the suitability guidelines, right? Because the security clearance, again, guidelines are the same. There has been this huge push for Congress for reciprocity, for saying, the one clearance concept, once you've been cleared, that should be applicable across government agencies. But because each of these agencies has their own suitability guidelines, that's really kind of throws a wrench into all of the issues with reciprocity. But DOD has gotten way better, at least on their reported figures, but that doesn't necessarily apply to other agencies. But I wish we had more transparency around those numbers. I think that would help.
Well, and I think, with reciprocity, it would certainly make recruiters' jobs a lot easier. I know back when I was recruiting, transferring from a DOD clearance to a DOE wasn't as bad, but like you said, DHS was notoriously, because of those suitability guidelines, some folks just couldn't get pushed through, mainly with law enforcement agencies. It does have to do with criminal conduct and drug conduct and things of that nature, but definitely would make recruiters' jobs a lot easier, being able to sort of switch candidates in and out willy-nilly. So,
yeah. And Robert asked about the foreign preference, foreign influence factors there. That was a really surprising thing that I noted that I haven't figured out yet, but I did not see an uptick in foreign influence or foreign preference denials and revocations the same way we did others. So again, a lot of these other adjudicative guidelines we're talking about, we saw double or triple the number of denials, revocations. We did not see that same uptick in foreign influence and foreign preference. Now that could be COVID related. Like, are we just not, nobody's coming, nobody's going? I mean, I don't know. I definitely know that China and Russia and all these foreign intelligence, our adversaries are still out there. But I think the factors is how the intel community is operating globally. The insider threat is the big piece of it too. So I think they're looking at how they can kind of network influencers. And we've seen that in some of the cases. Christopher Burgess writes about those cases for us often at Clearance Jobs and does a great job. And you see how they try to literally turn folks who are in the military community or who are already inside in the US. And I think those are just harder to vet out. And the standard security clearance process is not necessarily going to flag those the same way. You might see an uptick in clearance to not, the overall clearance denial and revocation based on foreign influence or preference. It before could have just been based on you were born overseas. You had, you have too many foreign ties. Somebody asked about owning property. Yes, if you own property in a foreign country, if you're sending money back to relatives in a foreign country, a lot of the foreign influence preference denials and revocations will definitely tie into how tied you are into those other countries. And again, just because of, probably global pandemic type issues, we're just seeing fewer people who are having that. I know we also had a question come up about someone who wanted to get a Irish passport. What was the funny thing?
I'm looking at some of these comments, my friend.
I miss it. So if I can get a foreign passport,
all the internet people.
And I like how they're just LinkedIn user, anonymous LinkedIn user would like to ask a sexual based question. Getting a foreign passport or having dual citizenship is not an automatic disqualifier to obtain a security clearance. So that's always like news you can use. Now, going out and obtaining dual citizenship after already having obtained a security clearance could certainly be an issue. Now, it's not like a hard and fast, like it's not, you absolutely can't. So I would just say weigh the pros and cons, maybe potentially talk to your security officer about it. If the personal benefits to you far outweigh the risk to your career, it's not like you absolutely may not. It used to be they made you turn in your foreign passport, for instance, and all that. That has certainly changed because there's just some countries you don't even have a choice in obtaining dual citizenship. If you are affiliated with that country, they grant you citizenship. So they have updated a lot of the policies around that and around the dual citizenship piece of obtaining a security clearance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, the main moral of the story with all this is the whole person concept. One sort of issue within your background isn't necessarily a disqualifier, minus a few things, but, just being honest and making sure your ducks are in a row in terms of those financial considerations. If you file for bankruptcy and then go pay for sex a million times, just think about, the entire whole person, like you said, Lindy. I think that's important to know as a new clearance applicant. So
I liked how that user was anonymous because he didn't want to have to get divorced for having said that he paid his spouse for sex on the forum. Anyway, but that ties into the question, like if the overly honest person or the sarcastic person, and how that obtains the polygraph. But that's why they ask you a few questions at the beginning that are meant to baseline you. So if you're going through a polygraph, we have a ton of articles and content about, the polygraph process and what to expect as a security clearance holder. No, you should not study to try to beat the polygraph, but it is okay to know what it is and be aware of it. Because again, I think we talk about this, a little soul searching before the application process, before going through a polygraph process is a good idea. You don't want to sit in front of the polygraph examiner for the first time and start thinking about some of these issues or topics because, like you said, it could certainly come up. And there have been updates. Even in the latest Intelligence Authorization Act, there was clarification around the polygraph process. They are looking to eliminate, streamline. We might even see the consolidation from not having a full scope polygraph process to really just narrowing down to a counterintelligence polygraph process. So the polygraph is under review now, and the polygraph alone cannot be used to deny or revoke your security clearance. The polygraph is still used because it's really good at getting people to disclose information that wasn't previously disclosed. So your sarcastic personality or over, or weirdness is not going to be an issue. Your over honesty, it might be if you're disclosing information that you haven't before, and that's why the process still exists and is still out there. We have not talked about drug involvement, the uptick. There was an increase in drug involvement, security clearance denials, and revocations. So again, if we're talking about top causes of clearance denial and revocation, let's pretend this discussion had a topic focus at the beginning. It was top cause of clearance denial and revocation, but we will respond to anything. Again, financial issues, top cause of clearance denial and revocation, personal conduct issues, and then drug involvement, criminal conduct issues are also almost always there in the top 5. And we did see an uptick in drug involvement. Marco wrote about how those are largely folks who were doing drugs after obtaining a security clearance, which is a switch that we didn't used to have. And that's really tied to all of the states who are legalizing drugs now, and you're just coming across it a lot more. Have you seen any questions about that over at the blog, or have any thoughts on that, Katie?
Certainly. I know that we've seen a few in the chat here on specific states that have it legalized. And, still, if you're maintaining a security clearance and knowingly engaging in those acts, that's not something that you're supposed to be doing. A lot of questions on the blog relate to, I smoked marijuana 3 years ago. Really, with mitigating factors, it is time passed. I do have a couple others that I wanted to note that don't necessarily have to do with marijuana. One of the questions, what kind of drug test is currently administered in TS security clearance positions? And I know that in reading through the threads, it's been, the good old urine test and not a hair follicle test. But I mean, really, the moral of the story is if you do hold a security clearance, you really shouldn't be doing that. Some folks asking about acid and MDMA and all that good stuff. Really, if you are maintaining a security clearance, don't engage in things that are federally illegal. So those are some of the fun questions we get over on the blog.
Yeah, I mean, and it all comes down to prescription too. That we wrote about that with ketamine in your security clearance. Though there are FDA approved ketamine dosages that can be used for individuals. So if you have a doctor and a federally legal process for obtaining it, I mean, that's the issue with marijuana, and that's what everybody talks about. The push is going to be, I mean, Congress has to change the federal policies around marijuana usage before we see any change in that. Because right now we have the state law issues, and that can save you prior to obtaining a security clearance. But they're pretty clear once you obtain a security clearance that you cannot. And so that really goes down to, that's why the drug issues, continue to come up. So it really comes down to when you've passed use drugs and then what the federal laws are concerning that drug. And if there is a prescription-based use for that drug, and even if you're in a state where it's medically legal, that's a state policy around being medically legal. Unfortunately, the federal policies around marijuana use have not changed to help applicants in that way. So it's a legally prescribed controlled substance that you have a prescription for. Then that will come up again in the polygraph process. That's why they use it. They are pretty good at vetting out some of these issues. So they will, especially for the FBI law enforcement positions, you will likely get asked. I've seen a lot of candidates get thrown out for Adderall use or using even prescribed medications that they didn't have a prescription for. So the issue is not just around, the drug specifically. There is not this federal government, there's not this security clearance or national security issue with marijuana specifically. There's just this issue about illegal activity. It always comes down to if you're doing something and if you can't follow rules. And that really ties down to why we see folks who breach classified information. It comes down to the trust factor. If you are not trustworthy and if you don't want to follow the rules and if you think that you can create rules for yourself, I feel you. I want to be you, but a national security career is not for you. That's just the world that we're in. Got a question about periodic reinvestigations that I think is worth kind of considering because we do get questions about that too with continuous evaluation, continuous vetting. If you have a security clearance, you are now under continuous vetting. So continuous vetting is the policy that hits all security clearance, the entire security clearance population today. You will not need to undergo a periodic reinvestigation, but you will need to submit an updated SF-86 every 5 years. So the good news, NBIS is rolling out to industry, I know, as we head into 2023. You are going to have an updated e-application that will be way better than the old equip. And that will be every 5 years, you will have to be updating that information and providing that information. And it won't necessarily trigger a new investigation. It's basically like you self-reporting all of that stuff every 5 years. And self-reporting still applies. So again, if you find yourself, we've seen folks who have been able to mitigate a huge number of issues. So if you find that you've accidentally used drugs or received a happy ending at a massage or any of the other questions that Katie gets over at Clearance Jobs blog, as awkward as it is, the best thing to do is to report it before it comes up in a polygraph or an updated SF-86. If it's reportable, again, read the adjudicated guidelines and know what's out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're heading up to the end of our time, and I think getting to the end of our questions. Were there any other questions you saw come up in the chat that you wanted to address, Katie, or anything else that you had?
No, just that every question that I did see come through, we most likely have a piece of content on it. And if we happen to not, we are more than happy to create it for you. So links that you need to keep on your favorites tabs are news.clearancejobs.com and clearancejobsblog.com.
Yeah. So definitely check it out. Yeah, we have articles, again, pretty much every question that I've seen here. Somebody just asked about the polygraph process. We have a white paper about polygraphs that you can check out. So we have a ton of content, DUIs and security clearances. We have articles about those on the site. I mean, again, the big issue, we're talking about denials and revocations. The percentage of people who apply for a security clearance and have that denied is incredibly small. So if you are able to mitigate the issues and show through the whole person concept that you are reliable and trustworthy and organized and proactive, you will likely be able to obtain a security clearance. So the small number of percentage we see are people who probably should not have a security clearance. And even if you do get your security clearance denied, you can reapply after a year. And the passage of time is a significant step to help you be able to obtain a security clearance. And yes, Tyrone, it is being recorded. So if you want to watch Katie and I on demand later answering all of your security clearance questions, you can check it out later. Anything else, Katie?
No,
I hate goodbyes.
Yeah, well, I hope everyone has a great rest of their Thursday and week. This week, I felt so disheveled on what getting back to real life is, but it's a new year. Make good choices, and happy to see all you all in the comments. So
that's good. I love John. John keeps dropping his hearts, Katie. Just keep dropping those hearts, John. We love you too. And happy 2023 to all the folks who reminded me at the beginning of this call that I don't know what year it is. The article is Top Cause of Clearance Denial and Revocation 2022. I do know that now it is 2023. So tune in for more Clearance Jobs content over at clearancejobs.com. We will answer all of your hot security clearance questions. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Bye, Katie.